So welcome to the DARE webinar, and we'll talk a little bit about the DARE toolkit and about our experiences of creating it, what we're hoping for, and with everyone taking up DARE and joining and learning from it. And we'll talk a little bit about the evaluation that we've recently completed on DARE and those who've completed it and their feedback as well. If you can just keep yourself on mute so that we don't get sort of background noise, that would be really helpful. Thank you. And then obviously at the end, if there's questions, feel free to unmute yourself to join in with any questions. Brilliant. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tracy? I suppose we should introduce ourselves, shouldn't we?
We should. So yes. You go ahead, Emma.
Great, thank you. So I'm Emma. So I work for the Hampton Trust. I'm the CARA Development Manager. So I lead on a piece of work that looks at interventions for early identified domestic abuse offenders. So first time arrest for domestic abuse. It's an awareness raising intervention, and I'm more than happy to talk about that at a later stage. But I've also been working with the Hampton Trust for about 8 years now, with different areas of work, and DARE is sort of a culmination for me around a lot of the training for professionals over the years and some of the gaps in provision that we've seen.
Yeah. Yeah, good morning. My name's Tracy Kent. I'm the Deputy CEO of the Hampton Trust. I've sort of been around a bit in the Hampton Trust. I started off as what was called back then a women's safety worker, which is the partner support service for the individuals that come through to our programs, which we work with males and females now. So it's become a domestic abuse safety advisor role. But I started off very much wanting to work with victims, and I ended up moving into perpetrator work and specialised in sexual violence for a while, with those being victimised again, survivors of, and then moved completely and 100% into perpetrator work, which now I've got oversight of in the Hampton Trust. In terms of training, I've been part of workforce development training over the years, and the training has really informed DARE in terms of what's really missing for frontline workers, for agencies, for organisations that are dealing with vulnerable people maybe, or situations where actually they don't have the confidence to engage with those causing the harm, and they believe it to be somebody else's role. But as we go through the training, you can see sort of this webinar, you'll see why we've sort of developed this package and how important it is for everybody to take this step.
Thank you. So I'm just going to repeat myself once more, hopefully, because I know a few people have joined just as we're introducing ourselves. Welcome if you've just joined. Just going to remind you that this webinar is being recorded. I think it will be available on our website later on. So if you want to turn off your camera, or if you want to change your name for it, then that's absolutely fine. And also, if you could just keep yourself on mute as well. Sorry, Tracy, I missed that.
I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. Never mind then. Didn't miss anything. Wonderful. Okay, great. So thank you very much. And so we'll move on through. There we go. So just to say that we're really pleased to be able to hold this webinar in the midst of 16 days of action. I know that there's a real focus around trying to address and eradicate domestic abuse worldwide. And so while it's quite fitting, we've developed DARE to support professionals in order to continue to effectively play their part to end violence against women and girls, but beyond the 16 days. This is about taking things and really, we're going to talk a little bit in a minute about a whole system change, really. So in this session, we'll be exploring how DARE can support all frontline professionals engaging with their clients. We want to highlight the importance of it being everyone's responsibility to have a conversation. DARE was developed to assist in removing barriers to engagement of those who use harm by adopting a routine inquiry approach. So you might be familiar with different interventions over the years that have really taken a focus for routinely inquiring to identify and respond effectively to victims and survivors of domestic abuse. And what we've seen is a gap in terms of being able to do the same with people who use harmful behavior. And we're trying to fill that gap to really look at what's stopping us, what stopped us in the past, what stops us now, and what will support people to take this up in the future. And we've just added a quote from our CEO, Chantel, who's contributed massively to the DARE toolkit training. And what she said here is, to break the cycle of domestic abuse, we need to safely identify and engage people who are causing harm in their relationships. DARE equips you as frontline professionals with the confidence to play your part. So, of course, we're very much taking the position of, we can provide the training, but what we're looking for is everyone to take that responsibility and to look at what's stopping me. And I'm happy to speak about in a minute about my own experience in terms of my journey of not wanting to and exploring what that means and where that shift took place. And I think everyone that I've spoken to about that has had their own journey around a shift in understanding and a shift in responsibility around it. So I'm going to move us along to the next one. So why DARE? I mean, we've talked a little bit about it already, but it comes from our experience of working with multi-agency partners and working with perpetrators. We've been uniquely aware of some of the gaps in learning, the gaps in confidence, as well as the gaps in engagement with those clients. For many years, Hampton Trust have been developing and refining our own skill set around the engagement of perpetrators, as well as at the same time developing an ever-evolving training or suite of training or approaches to learning for professionals that are involved with families where domestic abuse is present. These experiences have informed our own understanding of gaps that have led to missed opportunities to engage with those who are using harmful behavior. And we want to change that. For years, the statistics around domestic abuse, they haven't changed despite our adaptations on how we work with and support victims and survivors. We want to focus on the source of the problem, and we want everyone to do that. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tracy?
No, if you think about, if you've been working in domestic abuse for many years, 2 women a week are being murdered at the hands of somebody who says they love them. And so that has never changed in my time of working in domestic abuse. And we see the harm inflicted on families, and be that children that have been exposed to domestic abuse, who then go through their own repeated cycles often. And then you've got those that campaign continuously that may have been victimized in their childhood, but it never seems to change. We keep putting a sticky plaster on the problem. It's about empowering our daughters and our sons to be those people that we want them to be in their relationships as they grow older. But the only way we're going to do that is by stopping it at the source. And it's about diminishing those myths and stereotypes that come with what we believe to be quite a scary individual. And most social workers I've trained in the past, they always say the same things. It's in relation to, I'm afraid of making things worse. I'm afraid of saying the wrong things, because I don't want to make it worse for the survivor, for the victim in that relationship, which is totally understandable. But it's how we go about that. And that's what DARE is about. It's how we go about having those conversations and being able to have quite difficult conversations with those that are causing harm, but in a way that we're not going to make things worse, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Well put. So we mentioned it briefly, but whole systems change is really what we're wanting to sort of focus on here, where all frontline professionals embed DARE in their first response. It's difficult because everyone will have their own unique structural, personal, professional barriers to doing so, some of which are known and some of which aren't. And part of what we look at with DARE, we'll cover the modules in a moment, but is a reflection on what are those. We have to understand what's preventing us, or what's in the way, or what are the gaps in terms of the way that we work with people in terms of being able to overcome them. So we do ask a lot in terms of those reflections for the professionals that attend DARE. And it can be some of the most powerful conversations that we've had. And there's a lot of shared learning as well around identifying some of the steps to overcome those barriers as well. So it's important to be aware of and act on our multi-agency coordinated responses. We need to be identifying those missed opportunities for engagement. We need to be exploring our own professional barriers for engagement as well. All of these aims actually sit within the wider agenda of national strategies to hold perpetrators to account, but in a meaningful and in an effective way. As one of the recent studies highlighted, and this stat has been circulating for years and hasn't really changed, 1% of perpetrators are offered an intervention, and that's not good enough. We've developed DARE to meet the following aims and to support professionals to be DARE aware, is what we call it. It's a new hashtag, so share if you can. DARE aware. So professionals, we want them to be confidently, routinely identifying domestic abuse perpetrators in their services. We want professionals to confidently, routinely engage with perpetrators and support them to identify what help they need. And we want professionals to confidently support perpetrators to access specialist services, which also supports an increase in quality and volume of referrals into specialist perpetrator services. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Tracy?
Yeah, I think when we talk about system change, we're very lucky in Hampshire, the Isle of Wight, Southampton. We've got a whole range of interventions set up to meet the needs of those that are perpetrating abuse. We've got services for high risk, we've got services for those standard medium risk, and they stretch far and wide, so we almost can cast a net and offer something to everyone. This is not what DARE's about. DARE's about being able to disrupt someone's behaviour by being able to have those conversations in terms of identifying specialist services that's going to help them at that time, because behavioural change comes later. Behavioural change comes after stabilisation, and it's important to recognise that although we are a domestic abuse perpetrator organisation per se, we very much understand and recognise there's areas across the UK that don't have the luxury of services as we have in our area. We've got a great relationship with the police, we've got a great relationship with our commissioners in terms of innovation and being able to develop new ways of working, but we know that it's a postcode lottery. And so to keep victims safe, to keep families safe, we know that disruption comes in the form of engagement and having an opportunity to find out more about somebody and find out more about what they need to make things better. The behaviour change can come later, and hopefully with the Domestic Abuse Act, the domestic abuse is a perpetrator strategy on the way at some point, so there will be more funding available for behavioural change interventions. But at this time, we need to focus on what we can do as opposed to what is out there, if that makes sense.
Thank you. So we wanted to look at what's covered in DARE. So we say the DARE toolkit, and we look at 3 different modules, and each of those modules will cover a different area, but each of those modules are set up for a specific sort of flow of learning and reflection. The first one, where we're calling it How to Identify Domestic Abuse Perpetrators, will be taking a deep dive into exploring those professional barriers. We'll be understanding myths and exploring typologies around domestic abuse to better understand who we're identifying and how. We want to be understanding our own barriers in terms of that identification, as well as our own unconscious bias, and looking at how that influences those missed opportunities. We'll also be looking at some of the tactics in terms of the behavior that helps us identify who those perpetrators are, particularly the ones that aren't specifically known to services for their behavior. Thinking about the improved referrals to services that we mentioned earlier. We want to be identifying those ones that aren't necessarily that obvious to services or haven't been identified, haven't been spoken to about their behavior. We need to be able to nudge them into those services. But in order to do that, we need to identify them first. The second module will be looking at how to explore risks and context associated with domestic abuse perpetrators. So looking more at their own barriers for engagement, understanding how the wider context enhances that engagement, including exploring needs, risk, trauma, and how that influences behavior, and how that can also be an opportunity to start that engagement. And exploring opportunities for engagement in perpetrators as fathers, as well as their own barriers to engagement and what that looks like. And when we take all of that learning from the first two modules, the third module is really about that engagement. So how to engage those individuals who cause harm and nudge them into specialist services. So we'll be really taking a focus here on motivational interviewing principles, skills, and tools, and specifically relating them to the sort of practice around that engagement and exploring additional tools that also support that engagement. They provide an opportunity to have conversations around some of the behaviors and reflections that really help sort of link in that this is an issue that I need to address, and supporting people to have those reflections and have those conversations. So, of course, although DARE is delivered predominantly online, which is never our preferred method in terms of, you know, there is an element of, as I say to a room full of virtual people here, there's certainly an element of learning that can be benefited from being in the same environment. There's an atmosphere that's created, there's that sort of shared learning. But what we found is that in order to reach the most people, actually online is just the most practical way to do that. So I think we're exploring whether it's feasible to do some in-person training, but the most of the DARE training is online at the moment. What I would say is that we will all the way through the DARE training encourage people to take steps to have in-depth conversations. So we have it's quite interactive, the webinar, all the way through, not the webinar, sorry, the DARE modules. There's breakout rooms, there's activities and exercises, points of reflection. So we really do want to make it as interactive as possible to try and cut through that sort of online barriers, which is why we cap the number of people in each cohort of DARE training. So as an example of some of the conversations that we have with the trainees in DARE modules, we need to understand our own roles and our own responsibilities. As we've mentioned, is some of the aims of the DARE training. What we want to do is break down our preconceptions, our internalized beliefs, our judgments and experiences, because these things direct us to take the steps that we need to either engage with clients or the steps to avoid that engagement, or limit what we can do with those interactions. So some of these things can really interfere with our ability to take the full opportunity to engage with those who cause harm. So one of the activities, one of the exercises that we have in DARE is looking at what prevents us from seeing the full picture. We ask participants to reflect on the elements that are known and that aren't known, that impact on their ability to see that full picture. So often with domestic abuse, we're not able to or willing to see the full picture, which is sometimes quite a difficult thing to admit to ourselves, which is why it's a very non-judgmental environment in order to reflect. Speaking from my own experience, I remember years ago speaking with a professor of mine, actually, who in Canada, we refer to perpetrator interventions as oh gosh, I'm forgetting the phrasing. I've been away too long, I suppose. But she was trialing an intervention to try and address domestic abuse. And I distinctly remember the thought in my head at the time of, how can you work with these people? This was a genuine thought, and I believed it with the full force of who I was. And that was before I had ever actually done any work in this field. I had worked with victims and survivors for a number of years, and very much felt like any sort of engagement with perpetrators was collusive. It meant that I was siding with them. I was giving them an opportunity. But what I hadn't realized at the time was that if we're not addressing this behavior at the root of it and looking at what's causing you as an individual to use this behavior, finding a way to engage with them, then we're not actually preventing it from happening, not in the full force of it. I mean, there are many different ways to try and address domestic abuse. And of course, there is absolutely a place for the criminal justice system in terms of being able to respond. We want to be able to improve the safety and well-being of people involved. But there are also a lot of people where they've never had a really honest conversation with anyone about their own behavior and the impacts. And what we want to do is encourage everyone to find those opportunities to have those conversations. So thinking about seeing the full picture in terms of looking at where those opportunities are. This can relate to risk, situation, opportunities to engage in discussion, or identifying perpetrators. So if I'm focused so much on the risk, I might not look at, well, where is this person going to come across to be alone, away from the victim or the survivor, so that we can have that conversation. Or I might be thinking more about an assumption that, well, because they've had this history in terms of offending, they're not going to be willing to have a conversation with me about this. But again, these are sometimes assumptions that we're making based on our own past experience of doing this sort of work. And what we want to do is try and shift that narrative so that we can look at all of the missed opportunities. Some examples that participants have previously identified when we've been doing this exercise are looking at beliefs. So somebody mentioned previously, older couples don't use violence, which of course we know is a myth. Some people have identified bureaucratic processes. So we can't travel to do a home visit, so rural clients don't get seen. We just miss those opportunities. So we might look at what are the opportunities or alterations so that we can still have those conversations. Some people, I have identified their own bias. So for example, if somebody is angry over the phone, it means that they'll be angry with any conversation, so it's not worth having. They could be their past experiences. So for example, if daughters would have known their parents argued, then they would think that that's normal, and so their relationship, they believe it's normal, instead of asking that person what their experience was like growing up in that environment and learning from that, and then shaping the conversation and the support around their own experience. We could go on and on in terms of some of the contributions. We've had so many different conversations around that. But it's such a powerful exercise to really explore what are those barriers, because as much as we like to think it's on the person who uses harm to stop, it's actually on us to try and enable that. And so how do we do that? Is there anything you wanted to add there, Tracy?
Yeah, I think it's mainly the bias and the beliefs are so interesting when we explore, and it's also looking at the comfortability of the person doing the work to be able to even initiate those conversations or be confident to, because they may well not be, if they've had their own experiences of domestic abuse, of being victimized themselves. And so it's being able to sit with that comfortably, like Emma was saying, but it's also understanding that biases exist, and they do exist, and we see it every day. We put out social media posts around success stories that we work with, and we get quite a lot of negative comments coming back in terms of the beliefs around perpetrators being able to change their behaviours. There's lots of myths and stereotypes out there. There's lots of belief systems already entrenched. And I even giving the time, when I look at my past career before working for the Hampton Trust, I worked with offenders, and their offending behaviour, we know that now, well, we know that high risk offenders of domestic abuse I'll probably have multiple offending. And so when I used to work with offenders, I never once asked, how was your relationship? How's everything at home? I probably missed so many opportunities when I was working there. I always remember working with a woman who had a family, and the flat was covered in holes in the walls. Never once did I ask him how these happened. I always asked her, is everything okay? What can we do to get you support? Because I knew that she was she's being victimized in that relationship. But I had a really good relationship with her partner. I just never had the confidence to have that conversation with him. So it's about demystifying that and bringing it down to a level where actually can we normalize these conversations now? And I think in terms of the next slide, it's about really looking at, not only do professionals have, if you can move the slide on, please, Emma. Not only having recognizing your own professional barriers in terms of engaging individuals to sort of working with us or working with other services, we also need to understand what it's like on the flip side of that. So we do cover off, and this is again another slide that we use in the training. We like to look at raising awareness of what some of the barriers are that prevents individuals to work with us, and that will be about our approach, because we're all busy, we've all got targets to meet, we've all got huge caseloads, but the fact is that is part of our barrier. If we're looking for answers, we have certain expectations of an individual to tick our boxes, then it's not client-led working, and it's about being able to understand. It may take a while before we actually get some proactive meaningful engagement with individuals, but first of all we've got to break down these blocks, because if somebody's sitting in shame, for example, they can't move forward, they can't possibly engage with another service because they're too I'll give you an example. They've attacked their partner, the partner's laying on the floor unconscious, and they're sitting on the floor next to them crying their eyes out, feeling very sorry for themselves, what they've done. They're not actually phoning the police or the ambulance. They're sitting in their own shame, and we see this a lot, and we have to move individuals on from that by giving them hope, by giving them choices of actually, how can I engage with this? How can I stop behaving in these ways? We know that minimizing, denying and blaming is incredibly normal for those that are, and it's normal human behavior. We don't want to be disliked. We don't want people to think badly of us. Domestic abuse carries a stigma, and specifically if you're being classified as a domestic abuse perpetrator. And so it's being able to work with the minimizing, denying and blaming, but also in the MI section, the motivational interview section of the training, and all the modules sort of blend into each other. We find ways how we tackle minimizing, denying, blaming behaviors and statements, and being able to look past that and work with what lies underneath. There's a huge amount of fear and anxiety around coming to agencies. There's a lot of biases in terms of engaging with professionals from those that are engaging with services, and we all know that there's a very much a typical myth that goes around social workers will take your children away if they find out that you're domestically abusing in your relationship. So all of these things are sort of subtly lying around in people's conscious bias, and it's unconscious bias that they will avoid coming to work with you because of the pure fear or the consequences of what they're going to tell you. Do you want to add anything to that, Emma?
Yeah, I think we wanted to put a question to you in the chat, if you can. Why do perpetrators minimize? Why do they blame others? Big question for a chat, I know. It's easier. Absolutely, it's easier. Yeah, it's easier than facing consequences in the short term. Yeah. Absolutely. Guilt. Absolutely. Guilt is such a powerful one, isn't it? Because guilt can actually stop us from moving forward. It can be so heavy. I remember once in one of the ADAPT sessions that I was delivering, we had someone who the guilt of his past behavior, you could see it actually weighing him down, but it was stopping him from looking at how can my relationship be positive in the future, because it was keeping him in one place. And the work that we had to do was around, you might not be able to repair it, but what can you do with yourself in terms of recognizing when those thoughts or feelings come up again? How do you think about it differently? How do you believe you are in relationships or should be?
I think some of the comments there really interesting. Is easier to deflect attention, not having the knowledge or tools on how to properly deal with it. Some have a godlike complex, they don't understand it's harmful. And I think the biggest issue we have when we work with individuals using harmful behaviours in a relationship is that they do not understand the term domestic abuse. Because if we all think about media, what we see for the layperson, it's if you don't work in this area, domestic abuse is up there. It's violence, it's attacking people, it's extreme, it's murder. We see this every day in the media. Well, not even every day, it's very little of it is actually reported, but we don't see those nuances of behaviours. We don't see the controlling behaviours, we don't see coercive control. It's all of those that we spend most of our time raising awareness of actually what it is in the first place, to enable somebody to know that they need to do something about it. Violence is 3% of all domestic abuse. It's incredibly small in terms of everything else that's going on in those relationships.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's some brilliant answers, and all of them are like absolutely spot on. And do you know what's I find the most fascinating about all of it is a lot of them are overlapping for any one individual. All of these reasons are why, and you think about the trauma and therefore wanting to deflect attention because maybe what's the negative attention look like before, and then feeling like they don't understand why it's harmful because that's been their experience as well. You could see how there's layers here to unpack. And so what we look at with DARE is linking the power of these initial conversations, just opening up a space to have a safe and non-judgmental conversation about their behavior, while obviously keeping focused around, that nudging into specialist services where that's possible, is linking all the way into the cycle of change. So thinking about people who are in absolute denial about their behavior, if we can bring in conversations that bring awareness to the issue, then it helps shift. If they're aware of the issue, but also justifying why they use that, then they're in that place where they're sitting with both. I shouldn't do it, but I am doing it. And so we want to shift them into a place where they're getting ready to do something about it, or they're more moving towards, no, it's not acceptable. I need to address it. And so it's all about how do we have different conversations at different stages around that. We need to know where they're at in the cycle of change, and we can't learn that until we try to engage with them. So it's not coming in heavy with your behavior is a problem, you need to stop conversation right from the beginning, because what's that going to do to that person? It's going to shut them down. They're not going to want to be a part of that conversation. So it's finding ways to bring them into a conversation. Which I'm giving away DARE, so I'm not going to go any further because we could talk about this for ages. Such brilliant responses all the way through. Gratification, there is that element of domestic abuse is about power and control, and people who feel the need to have that level of control exerted in their relationships. There's something else going on there, and what we want to do is try and pick that apart in a way where they don't feel out of control. And that's where the safe and non-judgmental space is such a crucial factor to open up some of those conversations. So I'm mindful of time, and there's a few more bits we wanted to look at, but I'll just say that alongside the conversations that we're having, there are additional tools in the toolkit that we look at to bring into further conversations, particularly if you've got the space or the time to do that. And the toolkit that we provide, there's a hard copy that gets sent out in the module, and there are there's detailed guidance around how to use them. And of course, everything with the caveat of don't use it unless you feel like it's safe to use, because there's, of course, always risk associated with domestic abuse, but we need to be more comfortable at exploring what that means so that we can look for those missed opportunities. I'm going to move us along to some of the feedback we've had. which is brilliant. So what difference can you make with the help of DARE? And we've recently completed an evaluation by the University of Southampton looking at the impact that DARE has had on those who've completed the training. We have to date trained nearly 550 professionals, all online. And what they've been saying really is that they've reported increased confidence in starting conversations with perpetrators. They've reported better understanding of how to refer or signpost clients to specialist services. So not just passing that information along, but having a conversation about it so that that referral is more of a meaningful connection and more appropriate. Having better knowledge around the services available to support individuals and families. And also routinely identifying domestic abuse perpetrators for referrals in the first instance. So that regularly asking the question, regardless of the information that we know, it's about considering the context and then looking for those opportunities to have those conversations that's applicable to your workplace, your role, that sort of thing. So overall, the evaluation said 81% of participants reported having gained increased confidence in starting those conversations, and 70% of participants reported having gained a better understanding of how to refer or signpost clients to specialist services. We'll put up a few quotes. I'm not going to read them all out, but what I would say is this one in the bottom right that says, "I'm now willing to be able to support families where domestic abuse is a concern. Previously, I have asked my team manager to avoid allocating me these cases." And I think that that's a really powerful statement that highlights a real honesty from that participant around that apprehension, which we hear so much from people, is there is a reluctance to have those conversations because of the associations that we have of perpetrators, where we know that most domestic abuse is behind closed doors. So it's a powerful position that we're in as professionals to address it, to take the onus off of the victim, to have to report everything in order for any action to be taken. And then in the bottom left, you'll see, "I'll be using the skills to identify and approach individuals who may be perpetrating abuse." So it's about that practical application. That's what we want to people to take away along with that. I'll just give you a minute if you want to read any of the others, although the webinar will be online as well. Is there anything you wanted to add, Tracy, just while they're reading it?
No, I mean, we're incredibly proud of DARE because the whole first year of delivery was a learning curve as well. So based on the feedback, everything we've learned through the evaluation, but also the facilitators, we've got trainers that live all over the country. And so if you were interested in face-to-face, we're more than happy to facilitate that. I've done a face-to-face recently with Solent University, and it went incredibly well. It was so nice to be back in a room with people again. But it's a 2-day module with its face-to-face. It takes more time, and especially doing the MI, you want to spend a lot of time doing skills practice, which we can do. But I think because we've refined it post the first pilot, and we all know that things tend to take over a year to embed. We are in the second year now, so it's been brilliant to be able to really reflect on what we've done and get the feedback from our trainers, but also from participants. And we've had such a great engagement. It's been brilliant what we've had in terms of the feedback that's really helped shape this version. And so yeah, that's all I want to say. Sorry, I'm on selling mode right now.
Yeah. Brilliant. And so we're very lucky that one of our previous participants, Sharon, had agreed to let us record some of her comments. It's just a brief snippet, but it might be helpful to provide a bit of insight. If I could just get a thumbs up from someone that you can hear it, okay.
I'm here to help the victim, but actually it's made me think she doesn't want to leave him. She wants to stay with him, and she wants her children to stay with him. So I need to build up that rapport and understand him and where he's coming from. And I think it's the DARE training really helped me, gave me that insight into why I need to build that relationship as well.
I think we spoke to Sharon for about an hour, so we've had to cut it down quite a bit, but there is a longer version available, I think, in social media. We've shared it recently, so if you're interested to hear more about what Sharon has to say. And then just finally, if you want any further information, we've got a dedicated email address for our training. We have a dedicated website as well, and of course call our office if you have any other questions. I guess that will move us on to questions.
There's one question there already. Can we have a copy of the slides? I'm sure that'll be fine. Yeah. Yeah, please.
I'm sure Helen will be responding right away.
As you've been so polite, Georgina, then yes, you can. Yeah. So over to you. Is there any questions or anybody from specific areas? Stuart.
Good morning. Thank you for this. It's been excellent, really helpful. I'm aware of some of the work that you've done on OpCara. How does the kind of DARE model fit into the work that you've done around OpCara, and kind of, you know, how will that look to work further within that model as it goes further and branches out to other police forces, other force areas, etc.?
Brilliant question.
Sorry,
no, you go ahead.
If I start, you finish, because you are the Cara queen. But it's I think a lot of our learning from that first engagement with offenders with OpCara has really helped to develop DARE, because we're meeting a bunch of strangers that we've never met before with no history. We're in a room with them on a Saturday morning. The tensions are incredibly high. There's lots of anxiety and angry individuals. We have to work really hard to bring that down and get those conversations going. So I think doing Cara has helped really hone those skills for the individuals that work for us as well, because we have to use motivational interviewing consistently through that process, and it's just got better and better because of that. Go on, Stuart. Did you want to say something else?
Yeah, just a question on that. Would you say then in that manner that Cara's kind of specifically around for the individual and around the individual, and DARE is around the staff and the people who are facilitating the process? Would that be how it would work, would you say?
Yeah, go on, Emma.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's funny because we have a history of constantly adapting the training we do for our facilitators for Cara. And since we've sort of finalized and delivered over the past sort of year or so DARE, we've ended up bringing in some of the DARE training into the Cara facilitator training, because what we found is, while we were bringing in elements of that, because we know that motivational interviewing skills is a massive tool for engagement regardless, but actually the way that we've lined it up with DARE, the way that the information comes across and the reflection elements of it have massively enhanced the ability of the facilitators to sort of just make sense of how motivational interviewing skills apply to having those conversations, particularly where there is an assumption, and I think it's probably it's not an unfair one, that often having a conversation with somebody about their behavior will be met with some resistance. And so it's looking at, how do we overcome that? How do we start a conversation, build up a bit of a rapport, build in a space for a non-judgmental environment to explore things and to ask people to reflect. So there's a massive overlap, but DARE is targeting professionals for training so that those professionals can have conversations with individuals. And Cara is looking at people who've been identified by the police because of their behavior and come to us for that exploring. So the skills are the same. The tools are very similar in terms of that, but it's a different approach, because one is who it's targeting. So you're absolutely right.
That's excellent. Thank you.
Is it right to say Cara is an out-of-court disposal and DARE is awareness? Oh, yeah, certainly. Yeah, absolutely. Were you attempting to follow on and answer that question? I think that probably is very succinct response. Thank you. Yeah. So for anyone who's not familiar, out-of-court disposal is essentially looking at an opportunity to address criminal behavior out of court, essentially. And so CARA is an intervention that's associated with the out of court disposal. So we'll be looking at issuing a conditional caution to someone who accepts it. That means the disposal with that individual is outside of court. And DARE is, yeah, definitely bringing awareness to these issues. Our assumption is, of course, that people complete the DARE training, professionals complete the DARE training, and then take it back to their own roles, their own workplaces, and continue to do that reflection, because I think the journey starts at the end of the DARE training. It doesn't end there, certainly.
And it really, it enhances any client engagement, to be honest, not even just perpetrators or offenders. It enhances managers in dealing with their teams. It enhances just day-to-day engagement with their clients.
Are there any other questions? I don't know why we expected we were going to be inundated with questions, but obviously we've made enough sense, Tracy. Of course, you know, if there's questions that come up, you know, in the meantime, maybe you go away and speak to colleagues, and then other questions pop up, please feel free to get in touch with the contact details. I'll go back to that just for a second in case you want to.
I believe they're going to send out the recording to all of you that attended today, so you'll have that, and you'll be able to show it to colleagues or see what the interest is.
Thank you.
Yeah, any further questions, just email us, and we're always open to having a chat. And like you were talking about CARA, obviously CARA is a national model, so should you be interested or want to find out more, we are having a launch shortly of our CARA website, and so there's going to be lots of information out there around the replication model.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you.
Great. We'll stick around until 10:30. So if anybody wants to hang back and ask any questions, then please feel free. But otherwise, we'll send you on your way to have a great rest of your Thursday. Thank you so much for joining us and letting us talk your ears off about DARE. Great to see you.
Thank you.